afternoon, everybody, and a warm welcome to our alumni, friends and supporters, and our UNSW community. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you the first instalment of Engineering the Future for 2020. This is the first time we have delivered digitally and will continue to do so through COVID. If you are joining us for the first time from neighbouring states or internationally, welcome and thank you for tuning to our Alumni Thought Leadership Series. I'm Professor Stephen Foster, Acting Dean of UNSW Engineering, and I'm delighted to begin our Engineering the Future series with the important topic, building better teams, harnessing the power of diversity. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we meet on, wherever we may be across the country, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here with us today. A conversation will be recorded and made public following the conclusion of this event. We encourage audience participation, and you will be able to do so by posting questions in the chat function of this webinar. The questions will be moderated, will be published and answers. We will publish and answer as many questions as we can. If you do have to leave early, the link to the recording will be emailed out to everybody who has registered. Before our main session begins, I did want to comment on some of the challenges that our university is facing at the moment. You would have seen in the media the number of job losses. I do want to assure you, particularly as our engineering graduates and alumni, that our faculty remains strong and that our schools are in good financial health. This said, there is some readjustment needed for the current times. Now, it is indeed my great pleasure to introduce you to our moderator for this session, Associate Professor Lucy Marshall. And Lucy is the Associate Dean of Equity and Diversity of UNSW Engineering. And Lucy, I'm very much looking forward to this session with you and the panel. Over to you, Lucy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Steve. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I am on. I am on Bedegal land today and want to welcome you all, depending on where you are in Australia or across the world. So today we are talking about teams. Teams are recognised as a crucial component of every organisation and absolutely critical in engineering. And as the world continues to evolve at a much more rapid pace, then the demand for high-performing teams is more pertinent than ever. So how do we build these high-performing teams? Well, research has revealed to us time and time again that the answer is diversity. With any diverse team, we bring in more viewpoints, we bring in different methods and introduce a whole suite of expertise that can drive creativity, collaboration, innovation. But identifying and building diverse teams is not an easy task. So increases in diversity have also been said to increase conflict in teams, and there are suggestions that diversity is only effective if it's accompanied by strong leadership and proper inclusive practice. The COVID-19 pandemic is also highlighting the difficulties ensuring that teams work equitably and that marginalised groups don't become more marginalised. So I'm really pleased today to introduce a panel of experts who have thought very deeply about diversity in engineering and to hear from them about their perspective on some of these really important themes. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Mr. Bill Cox. So as CEO of Aurecon, Bill leads over 5,000 people operating across 10 countries in a number of sectors. Bill is a strong advocate for diversity and inclusion and has been instrumental in driving Aurecon's diversity business case. He acts as Aurecon's ambassador for the Workplace Gender Equality Agency Pay Equity Leadership Initiative and as Aurecon's representative for the Male Champions of Change in STEM Group. Under his leadership, Aurecon has implemented female representation targets in Australia, presently aiming for 40% by 2020, really ambitious targets there. Bill is a graduate of UNSW, having completed a bachelor's degree in civil engineering, and he's worked in the industry and in Australia and the UK for the last 30 years. Welcome, Bill. I'd also like to welcome Ms. Nilram Azadpeyma. Nilram is a UNSW telecommunications engineering graduate who's been active in different STEM programs since she joined the IT industry. Her passion for diversity and inclusion has led her to lead the technical engineers track of women in Cisco in her previous role. She's been mentoring students in the hope to inspire more girls to join engineering streams. So welcome, Nilram, as well. And finally, I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Aaron Quigley. So Aaron is a professor in the School of Computer Science and Engineering at UNSW and is our incoming head of school. Aaron has research interests that include discrete computing, global HCI, pervasive and ubiquitous computing and information visualization. He undertook his PhD in the University of Newcastle in Australia over 20 years ago, where he met his husband Bradley when they were both students. In Aaron's volunteer roles, he is general co-chair for the ACM CHI conference on human factors in computing systems in Yokohama, Japan next year. He's a member of the ACM SIG CHI steering committee, member of the ACM Europe Council Conference Working Group, and an ACM distinguished speaker. Thanks very much for joining us, Aaron.
Okay.
So very pleased today to talk about diversity with this really distinguished panel. And maybe, Bill, if I could open the questions with you. What is your personal experience with engineering and diversity? Why do you think that is something that we need to pursue in our profession?
Okay, thanks, Lucy, and appreciate the welcome. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, and where I am today, it's the Gadigal people. So acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging. And I think for the context that we're in today, as engineers and scientists, to recognise some of the engineering that was part of the First Nations people that have stood the test of time for millennia. I think it's an important reflection for us all as part of the whole picture on diversity and inclusion. And I think that, to me, we talk a lot about diversity, and whether it's gender, whether it's age, whether it's sexual orientation, and ethnicity, culture, all of the different dimensions, and there are many, but it's about the inclusivity is really the key to us actually achieving better outcomes. And if I think back to when I graduated and when I was at the university to now, pleasingly, we have come a long way as a society and as a profession in terms of embracing that diversity. And when I see the graduates that come into Aurecon today, and compare that with the graduate group that I left with, it's a vastly more diverse group, thank goodness. And when you think about what scientists and what we do and what we contribute to society, that to me is the key to why this is so important. And people say, look, it's the right thing to do, but at the end of the day, the business case for how we get better outcomes for the society that we create the assets for, that's the really important thing for me. So if you think about anything that we do, whether it's an airport terminal, whether it's a piece of public transport or some sort of community centre, and you look at the people that are going to use that and the diversity and the diverse nature of all those people, if we don't have diverse teams that are involved in the creation of that asset to plan it, design it, to build it and maintain it, we're not going to get the best outcome. And that has been the revelation for me, that when you put diverse teams together on projects, the different thinking, the different backgrounds of how and how they inform the best ideas, you get more creative outcomes, you get more innovation, and ultimately you get the best answers. And so the diversity part's important, but the inclusivity, where the best idea, regardless of who it comes from, is the other really important part to how you get the teams to sort of make the best outcomes. So Lucy, that's some of my my early thinking on it, and why I'm so passionate about it. And it's something that we've come a long way, but we've still got a long way to go. And so it's something that you don't fix it. You don't fix it in a year. You don't fix it in 5 years. But I think by being able to have these sorts of conversations, we continue to test ourselves and challenge ourselves to further improve how we can create a better group of people to give society better outcomes. Thanks, Lucy.
Yeah, so it is really interesting thinking about how the engineering profession has changed over the last decades, and how just now I think there is a greater appreciation for some of the business case behind diversity and why it is an important thing to do. Nilram, can you tell me a little bit about what some of your experiences are with diversity? Note that you do a lot of mentoring of emerging women in engineering. What has driven you to do that?
Sure. Thanks, Lucy, and thank you for having me. Well, when I was at university, I knew back then that having diverse teams means a lot in terms of innovation and creativity. But only when I started working in the IT industry was when I realized in action how important it could be to have diverse teams. Diverse teams tend to think more carefully about the different aspects of a certain challenge. I'll give you an example. We do build a lot of different products in software engineering, some of which would end up having 1 billion users worldwide. You can think of some examples of that already. Only a diverse team can make sure all of the users from the different backgrounds, different age groups, different genders, all sorts of different aspects of diversity are considered in that piece of software so that it could be inclusive and at the same time useful. And on top of that, when you look into different organizations, the more diverse ones tend to have more employee engagement and loyalty. And that's what my experience has been. And when you talk to the students, when they have not entered the workforce yet, a lot of them talk about how having different teams with different people with different mindsets would go a long way. They know that already before even putting that into practice. So that's what I have seen in action, and that's why I think diversity could help us achieve a lot. And I will talk about it later, but it's our responsibility to go and make it happen all together. It's every one of us. Thanks, Lucy.
Yeah, so obviously lots of themes coming through about diversity driving different perspectives and different mindsets. But how do we actually measure whether we have a diverse team or not just using demographic data? Aaron, have you thought about this? How do we actually define what diversity is?
So when I think of diversity, again, thank you, Lucy, and thank you to everyone else for joining us today. When I think of diversity, I think of the sort of the onion model, which is what you know yourself about diversity and inclusion. And then there's a lot of things that you probably know you don't know, but at least you're aware of them. And then, of course, there's all these unknown unknowns. So as you basically build your own knowledge, you sort of build out the layers in your own onion where you can start to understand the protected characteristics and other important characteristics of society. So this could be everything from, disability through to intersex status. It could be something to do with sexual orientation, all the way through to, racial characteristics, things that are being out a diverse view. But then there's all this other stuff that you are kind of vaguely aware of, but you can't quite put your finger on it. And also there's a lot of invisibility in this. So you look at me and there's things about me, like my sexual orientation, you can't tell that by looking at me. You can't tell that I'm an immigrant. You can't tell that I'm Irish. So making assumptions based on what people look like and what they say and what they do is a dangerous thing. But we start to know that we need to kind of expand our view on what we do know, what we know we don't know. And then, of course, the great thing about this interesting area, and when you kind of learn and when you start to care about this, is you start to learn so much more about other perspectives on diversity and inclusion, and these other characteristics and these other aspects that you just were never aware of. So when here, for example, in Australia, there's a great respect, and we heard it several times already from other presenters, for the native custodians of Australia, the people who came before and the people who came before them, and we're building on the shoulders. And that's a really interesting and valuable perspective on diversity and inclusion that makes us all strong. So I think the way we should all think about it is educate ourselves to know what we need to know, be aware of the things that we're not necessarily aware of, but should inform our thinking, and always be open to new perspectives on diversity and inclusion. And once you do that, you grow your knowledge, and you do that by considering it and working with other people.
So,
thank you, Lucy.
So one of the difficulties in being open to new experiences and new knowledge, I think, comes around when we're talking about managing a team. And so ensuring that all of the members of your team are also open and willing to listen to new people, to listen to different viewpoints when you're solving a problem. Prior to this, we asked any registrants to send questions that they might have around diversity, and we had a lot of questions that came out around managing diverse teams. So how do you work with people who are introverts and extroverts on the same team so that everyone can be productive? Or how do you ensure that you have a harmonious culture within your team when you've got people who come from very different backgrounds? I wonder, Nilram, if you've thought about this around the groups that you work with. How do you ensure that you have, a truly inclusive workplace where people do contribute equally?
Sure thing. So that's quite interesting to talk about, because I've been thinking actively about how we could make sure everyone is included. And I saw something around how when you don't actively try to include everyone, that also means that you're not including them and you're actually excluding them. So one of the features that I see in a whole bunch of different, activities that we do is that we try to make sure that everyone has a say, whether it's the same as others, whether it's different, whether it's with a little bit of experience, whether it's a lot more. Everyone has to have a say, and you have to give them a chance. And you will be amazed by the results you will see when you give everyone a chance to have an input. Whether you're doing something in engineering, whether you're creating a product, it is, or whether you're creating a culture for a company. All of these come to say that we need to include everybody's mindset, and that will change the way we look at the different challenges and the different problems that we would be facing day to day. I hope that resonates with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then perhaps, Bill, as a manager, how do you ensure then that you have a team where you do that, where people are listened to and are invited in to give their opinion, and that there is active communication amongst your team?
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. And part of it does come, and like a lot of these things, it's there is a leadership element to a lot of this that increasingly makes a difference. So in choosing leaders that have that natural tendency and appreciation of diversity and have bought into the whole concept of doing that is important, and then to make sure that those leaders, and whether you're chairing a meeting, running a workshop, whatever it is, that you are very sort of clear to engage people who, in different circumstances, are perhaps they're quieter than the others, but you get past that loudest voice in the room that's got a view on everything. That isn't necessarily it's not the only view, and it's not necessarily the right view. So being quite overt about working through the different people in the room is important. And if I just think back also to the process that we're sitting on a Microsoft Teams call now, and we've probably all sat on hundreds, if not thousands, of them over the course of the last few months, that it does create this discipline where you have to work the screen. and because otherwise it's chaos. And in doing that, you then get the opportunity to draw out the quite often the more thoughtful people that don't necessarily speak up all the time. And that's another important element to making sure that everybody gets heard, but then also that that the people are sort of thoughtful around what is the best idea and what's the best concept, as opposed to always reverting to the person who is seen to be the most experienced or the most sort of erudite around how they're expressing it, which might not necessarily be the case. The last point is an interesting one, and it goes to this whole concept of diversity of thought, that is also really important, and that can come from anywhere. And it's recognising that having contrarian thinkers in our teams, done in the right way, so that they're not disruptive and they don't undermine, but to recognise that someone who's always thinking differently can be really powerful. And if you listen and and people don't just immediately react, but they take away and they go away and have a think about what's been said just because it's different, can also be really be powerful in terms of broadening people's minds. But once again, it's a learning for everybody to have an open mind around where things are coming from. So that's certainly some of my experience, and I think COVID in itself has been we're treating it as a learning experience, and I think we're continuing to learn a lot out of it, and having that approach, I think can be helpful. Thanks,
yeah,
Liz.
I mean, certainly I've seen it suggested that the current situation with the pandemic is helping to drive some more divergent thinking, making us think differently about workplaces and potentially leading to more inclusive workplaces. Aaron, I know you do a lot of work with technology. Have you thought about how the current situation in technology might help improve inclusivity and diverse teams?
Absolutely. So one of the reasons I came to UNSW and to the Faculty of Engineering is the fact that we have 8 different schools of thought. So you already respect the fact that, like, where I'm sitting, what you can't see is that I'm looking straight at the Sydney Harbour Bridge through a window here. So everything in front of me represents the layers of engineering that have gone over, like, hundreds of years, that have helped, clean the water supply, preserve the air, the ecosystem, thinking about civil engineering, chemical engineering, computer science and engineering. Like, it's all been building up over time. And computer science and engineering is one of the newer parts of this. And when we created our conference series, the CHI conference, Computer Human Interaction, our theme for that next year is making waves, combining strengths. And these are 2 different very important characteristics, because through diversity, you get what Bill just said. You get contrarian opinions. My community of computer-human interaction researchers within computer science and engineering, there's lots of contrarian voices. There's lots of people who want to think differently and want to challenge the status quo. And that's where the power comes from, when you can draw those strengths together. And to me, why we strive to be diverse and inclusive is, I'm ahead of school now, coming into engineering. I want every single person, young person on the planet who can think about what they want to do, to think, oh, computer science and engineering, that's for me. If anybody looks at what we do in engineering and what we do in computer science and says, oh no, that's for someone else, that's failure as far as I'm concerned. So I want the world to think that what engineers do and what computer scientists do is for them, because it is for them. Because I don't want anyone in the world's population out to begin with. So if there's a percentage of people who say, well, no, that's not really for me, I'm diminishing my pool of talent immediately. So I'm hamstrung from day one. I want everybody. So to me, it's a strategic objective to do this. It's smart. It's the smart way to progress society, and it's the strength. You get all of these strengths drawn together. So this is the why we want to do things in a diverse and inclusive way. We can talk later about, like, who and how we're going to do that, and there's different ways to achieve this. But I think Nilram said it earlier. This is everyone's responsibility. Like, we're all in this together. You draw the strengths together by having lots of different people in the organization understand why you're doing this and how you can actually do it and the impact on society, because these are societal questions we're talking about. Thank you, Lucy.
So Nilram, do you want to follow up on that? As you know, Bill said that it takes strong leaders. You have to have that leadership that ensures that you're building a strong workplace. How do we engage entire organizations? How do we make sure that it's valued at the grassroots?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that I want to make sure I touch on is that we do have a lot of organizations in which the leaders have the correct mindset and they're leading the right initiatives. They're trying to build diverse teams. They're trying to make sure they include everyone. And that's the top-down approach, which is great. It's done, it's ticked off. One thing a lot of people forget about is that you need to have a bottom-up approach as well. How do you make sure the individuals, the everyday individuals that are making things happen on the ground have the same kind of mentality? How do you make sure they are making everybody else comfortable in every single conversation? How many times have we been in meetings where someone didn't talk at all and no one asked that person whether they had an opinion or not? So we want to make sure everything is inclusive, not only from the leadership point of view, but also from the everyday people as well. And that's the part where culture comes in. And building that inclusive culture could mean a lot in the long term. And like it was mentioned before, it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen over a couple of years. It takes a long time to build that inclusive culture in place, and to make sure everyone understands why. Having different programs to make sure people understand why they are doing certain initiatives goes a long way. Sometimes people just don't know what they don't know, and doing a simple training for them would make them realize when they include someone else in decision making, how they will make them feel like. Or when they don't do that, how would that make someone feel? So all in all, where I'm trying to get to is that it all comes from the culture, which again is not built overnight, but it's something we need to focus on. Hope that helps, Lucy.
Yeah, maybe as a follow-up, Nilram, I can ask you, what are some of the specific programs or practices that you've seen work really well in the workplaces you've been in?
Sure thing. So I can give you heaps of different examples. This is an area I'm really passionate about. Firstly, when it comes to the people, to the workforce, one thing you could do is to run different diversity and inclusiveness programs in which you would teach them around the things they would do that they are not conscious about. That unconscious bias that a lot of people would have, Aaron touched on that too, could be something that could be improved with certain trainings that we could run and certain activities that could show them what could be different. So that's one thing around the workplace. And running other type of programs as well, where you are showing how diversity could help teams, can also, again, show people how diversity could be affecting the rest of the society as well. For example, if you're running different STEM programs, if you're mentoring students out of high schools, that's when you will see all of the value that's coming out. And we might be missing out on some of them, like Aaron mentioned, just because no one has ever told a girl, and I've seen this firsthand, so I'm saying it as it is, you can be an engineer. There's nothing wrong about it. You can be a fabulous engineer and you can have a great life too. So seeing things like that improve over time would help the people who are in the workforce to be more inclusive as well. These are a couple of examples of the programs I could think of.
Excellent. And Bill, maybe just to follow up with you, we've had some questions come in the audience about specific inclusive practices that maybe you have seen that you found have been successful in your organisation.
Sure. Thanks, Lucy. Certainly, and I think back over the last few years around all of the different dimensions of diversity and how we have, you know, put in place different programs that have helped to showcase and to develop different groups within the business, but also creating, you know, opportunities to celebrate, whether it's different national days, as something that just sort of highlights the diversity of the workforce. And, you know, when you have one of our town hall meetings and you see all of the different people that make up our business, you realise why that's important. And, you know, having we have a pride and diversity group within the business that celebrates all of the different dimensions of LGBTI plus, and to recognise that and to do that, and, you know, it really does fill you with pride, to use boom boom, when you see the people who come to that sort of session and that talk, that really helps to educate people. And it's not doing it, and it's doing it in an authentic way. It's doing it a way that shares people's vulnerabilities and some of the stories you hear of how people have been treated in the past, that people sort of just are there saying that's not right and that has to change. And so it's educating people, but also it's about sort of setting a standard and not walking past that standard if people aren't living up to it. And we're in the engineering field, so safety is a big part of what we do, and that whole message around the standard you walk past is the standard you accept, and we apply that to diversity and inclusion in the same way that we do about safety. And so whether it's casual sexism, whether it's you know, loose talk, poor language that is offensive or exclusive, it's calling that out and sort of saying that's not right, and educating people around, you know, why, you know, diversity is so important to us. And if we don't do that, we lose talent, we lose people. And, you know, when we talk about the war on talent and we talk about there not being enough engineers and scientists to do the things that are needed, attraction and retention of top talent in all of its forms is absolutely critical. And so, you know, and that's just another dimension to the business case that, you know, this is real. This isn't feel good, nice to, you know, we're just trying to be nice to everybody. You know, this is an important part of how we get a better society ultimately, and it's very real. Thanks, Lucy.
And that's a great analogy, talking about safety in the workplace and thinking about inclusion as being one of the aspects that we have to consider in the same way. I wonder how we start people from thinking about that from a very early age when they're just starting out their career. Aaron, you're head of school.
Yeah,
coming in.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would definitely. How do we do it? Well, we do it for society. I mean, we start small, we go big. So I think it's both, you know, it's, as Nilram said, it's this top down, you know, getting that right, hiring leaders, having people respect and represent the values that we actually want to aspire to. But it's also equally important that this is everyone's responsibility. So, you know, if I look at the top-down organizations, I work with what's called the Association for Computing Machinery, and that's the group that gives out the annual Turing Prize. They have a council on diversity and inclusion, and that gives advice out to the 100,000 Extn that are scattered across the globe, that are in all of these different special interest groups. So the leadership know where they should take action. You know, so that means, you know, we have global community diversity and inclusion chairs within the CHI conference, but the special interest group on human computer interaction has activities, and there's all of these other programs or activities. So it filters down, and that's great. But that's, you know, 100,000 people. It's tiny. Like, we're talking billions of people. So what I look back on is, so when I moved to Ireland, like with my husband Brad, we had to appeal to the Minister for Justice to allow both of us to stay, for both of us to work. There was no recognition for us, zero. That he basically, he's Australian, he came in on a 1-year working holiday visa. We had to basically beg and beg and beg. And eventually when Ireland went through its plebiscite, where they went through and had a vote, they made a very strategic decision to say, you need to talk to everybody. You need to find your grandmother. You need to talk to your grandmother about why this matters. And I think that's where we need to actually do. So that when grandmothers and grandfathers and parents talk to children, they're talking to them in terms of, this is why we want to have this strong society. This is what it means for society to be diverse and inclusive. And to stop people saying, oh, that's for boys and that's for girls and that's for that kind of person, that's for this kind of person. All of that bias, that gets baked into young people from a very early age. So the call out now to everyone who's listening is, talk to your family. Literally, like, you know, when I had to come out of the closet and I had to kind of start telling my brothers and family and everybody else to say, yeah, I'm gay, but you know, this is fine and I'm going to have a happy and successful in life. For everybody here who sees themselves as an engineer, like, come out of the closet and tell people that you're an engineer, and tell people that you want everyone else to be an engineer, and to think in that way, to say it's for everybody. And we need all of those strengths, because I don't think it's just the trickling down or like creating structures and having a university. That's not enough. The students leave university, they need to go to companies. And don't do it, you're not being smart. If you don't do it, you're not being strategic. If you don't do it, you're not harnessing the strengths of everyone on the planet to solve these big problems. So I don't think it's just a top-down problem. The bottom-up problem is, talk to your grandmother. So if you're an engineer, talk to your grandmother and make sure that your grandmother is telling her other grandchildren, why aren't you, you know, that's for you. That to get engaged. It's not just a few people. Thank you.
Yeah, so that can be quite difficult, I think, starting those conversations with people and you know, thinking about how to make that first step. Nilram, you're a young woman in the engineering, in the construction industry, sorry, in the computer science industry. Sometimes diversity can feel like it's worlds away. So how can you adopt that sort of bottom-up approach that Aaron is suggesting and that you were suggesting when you were speaking earlier?
Sure. So, I mean, let me start with saying that if you feel like having diversity, specifically gender diversity in this case, feels a little bit far away, I can feel you. And like I was giving the example to and the rest of the panel earlier, I have given presentations to too many rooms where I've been the only female in the room. Clearly, that's something that we could improve on. And I can feel that pain. I'm with you on that. Now, when I first saw that challenge around 5-6 years ago, I thought, okay, I will help the team with these couple of steps, and surely by then we'll be able to be in a better place. It took me 5 years. It might sound easy, but it took me 5 years to understand where the challenge is initiating from. So we can do a couple of things to help improve this problem. The first thing is that there are not enough female engineers coming out of universities so that they could be fed into different workplaces. That's problem number one. What can we do about it? I would encourage everyone to take the chance to go in and talk to a bunch of high school students and encourage them to become engineers. Show them what it is like to be an engineer. Show them a couple of examples of the things you would do, and it's not rocket science. Just tell them and they will be inspired. That's challenge number one. The other problem, like Will suggested correctly, is, okay, let's say we have got a whole bunch of female engineers. I'm only talking about gender diversity in this example. Let's say we have got a whole bunch of female engineers in the workplace. How are we going to make sure they are included? And we are going to do the best type of retention we could do. Like Will said again, zero tolerance. We should never accept anyone saying something loosely that's not right. And we should call it out. One of the things that I've seen, I've been very lucky to work in cultures that has been inclusive, but I've heard many other women in the industry telling me stories of the things that happened to them. and they never talked about it because they felt like it was just something that someone said, or it's okay, it's not that important. Talk. All of the women in the industry need to talk about the challenges they face, because I promise you it will help at least 10 other women around you, and it will give them a better career. So these are the only things I can talk to you at this point in time. I mean, this is an area I get really passionate about, so I can talk forever, but I will give the chance to others.
Thank you, Nilram. So Bill, earlier on, you talked about how much the profession has changed in the time that you've been there, and how we're seeing such a big push for women in engineering programs and for different sorts of programs that encourage diversity and inclusivity. But when we have a look at senior leadership levels in Australia, we tend not to see the same diversity reflected, and particularly in things like ethnic diversity. We see, there's this so-called ceiling that some professionals of certain ethnic descents might experience in the workplace. How do you think we address these sorts of imbalances that we might see at senior leadership levels?
Thanks, Lucy. And yes, it is certainly an issue that when you look at our society and when you look in businesses and the industry at sort of junior levels, graduate level, and mid level, it's there, but it's not getting to that top level. And I think it's the same sort of approach that, and don't take my comments as to say that we're there on gender, because we're not, but that same concept of you can't be what you can't see has some justification. And so to have more leaders coming up through the ranks who are being sort of overtly promoted and developed into senior leadership, to C-suite and to boards, is a really important part of sending that message that there isn't that ceiling, and that is an important part of developing and getting that better diversity and inclusion at the decision making tables at the top of the organisation. But once again, you can't sort of leave it to saying, oh yeah, it'll happen over time. We've got to be setting targets, and we've got to be actively promoting to make that happen. And so overcoming those unconscious bias elements that Nilram talked about earlier on, they're there on racial and cultural dimensions as well. So they're all quite specific and quite decisive moves that we have to make to get that to change. So and it won't, and unless it happens at a leadership level, it won't happen. And we need to recognise that in our society, that when you look at Australian sort of society and the graduates coming out of our university programs, they are the leaders. They are the leaders of the future, and they are a very diverse group of people. So we've got to take them up through the ranks.
Yeah, and so it may be worth thinking or talking about then about why they aren't coming up through the ranks, or they potentially haven't been over the last few decades. I do think it is important for us to think about what some of the potential barriers might be to ensuring that people stay in our profession and continue on. Maybe Aaron, I could throw that back to you. What do you think are some of the very real barriers that we have to recognise, along with the old adage, you can't be what you can't see? What are some of the other things that might influence people coming through?
Yeah, I think it's definitely role models are very important in all of this. And one thing we do in our HCI community within the SIGCHI community is we try to lay this bare as best we can. So we try to survey what we're doing. So we create reports for each other. Now it's not always perfect, but at least it makes everybody aware where the shortcomings actually are. And just recently, we were trying to come up with how we will survey. At the moment, we have hundreds of what are called associate chairs in that conference, and just asking the question, like some of the questions are easy to ask, age. Some of the questions are more difficult to ask, how people respond to questions around their gender identity. That's a little harder, but that's at least been kind of standardized. And then you get to something like race, and there is no uniform global definition of this. This is, people identify this very differently depending on their own personal backgrounds. Everything from people from, very traditional, family settings, all the way through to people who have, different backgrounds. So you can't just start using terminology very carelessly. And I think that's an important thing for all of us to recognize, that when we gather the data and when we report it back to each other, we have to do it in a way that's very not just sensitive, but is also considerate of the fact that if you start putting people into specific buckets, why are you doing that? Are you doing that to kind of tick some box? Is that the point of this? Is it to say, oh, we need 2%, LGBTIQ, and we need 4% of this and 8% of that? This is not like sort of a recipe that we're trying to build. We're trying to say it's opportunity for all. And I think what Bill said earlier is two things. If you're going to do this, either personally or as a leader, you have to be authentic. You're not doing this because you think I'm doing this because my boss is telling me. You have to lead. For one. The second one I think that's really important is when I look at, like, I'm new in my school, I don't know everybody, and I'm actually quite fascinated as a computer scientist and engineer to learn about what everyone else is doing. So that comes, I believe, from like a sense of respect. I respect what my other colleagues do. I respect why they're driven. I respect the undergraduates and postgraduate students. I respect that they're devoting their lives towards this profession. But I also respect the rest of engineering and the rest of the university and society at large. So you have to be authentic. You have to engender this sense of respect in other people. And then finally, you just have to have people who understand the value of what they're actually doing in all of this. So I think if you can get those three kind of factors working together, I believe you'll actually, you'll start making the change that you're actually looking for.
Right. And so a lot of what you're talking about there is this idea that trying to build a culture where it's not everyone for themselves, it's ensuring that people communicate with each other and talk to each other.
I think so. That one thing I would say again is that you were talking about these the getting the most out of people. We now hopefully have started to realize there are many channels of communication, and just relying on the face-to-face, that's one way. But now you've got all these digital channels. You've got so many ways to draw out the talents and skills and the knowledge from people. Don't just assume that you're going to go back. We're going to go back after this, COVID situation. And I've even said it to some of my colleagues. I hope I get to meet you soon, but maybe I won't. Unfortunately, I could be head of school for the next 5 years, and I could just be doing it from my desk here remotely, because things could get worse. So that's a potential possibility. So then you have to think about what are the channels of communication that we're actually going to be able to use as a society, and to use these digital technologies not just to enhance remote collaboration, but also face-to-face collaboration, and take all of those channels, all of the different ways of interconnecting with people, and using all of them. Because I think it's right, what we're seeing now is the introvert versus extrovert argument. That needs to kind of go away, because it's all about skills and talent and knowledge and drawing that out of people. And it's for leaders to figure out the good channels to draw that out and harness all of that talent. And the way I'm trying to do it now, and the way I think other people are trying to do it, is just having this kind of, again, the onion model of, like, sort of passing information out and then getting feedback at each level before it goes out to a much wider community. It's a challenge, but it's a great opportunity, I think, as well.
Yeah. And so maybe we could unpack that a little bit more, talking about what's happening at the moment with the pandemic and these new ways of working, new technologies, new ways of thinking about how we communicate with our teams. Certainly there's been a suggestion that this will enable introverts, extroverts to communicate more equitably or more effectively, but there also is a lot of good evidence out there as well that during the pandemic that marginalized groups tend to become more marginalized. People who have caring responsibilities then potentially aren't able to contribute as much in the workplace. Maybe, Bill, I could ask you, is that something that your company is concerned about? Is that something that you have personally thought about?
Thanks, Lucy, and yes, and I think the first thing to state is that there is no part of our society that is no dimension that hasn't been touched and isn't being touched by the pandemic, and it's fascinating on one level, but it's also, you know, throwing up some real concerns, but also throwing up some real opportunities that we want to make sure that we don't miss, and that, yes, obviously, you know, mental health issues are a great concern, and I think certainly we've got a big team in Melbourne, in Australia, but also teams in the Philippines who have been in lockdown for months, and so that's an issue, and being able to manage people's mental health there, but also to recognise working from home in an Australian context is one thing, but when you go to our teams in the Philippines or Thailand, where you might have 3 generations living in a 3-bedroom apartment in 600 square feet, working from home is a much more challenging environment than we're doing. So it's, you know, recognising that different setting, but to recognise the caring responsibility issues and how you sort of make allowances for that, but also to recognise that with working from home, working flexibly, trusting people a lot more, even when they're not in front of you in the office environment, means that we've gone much more to the concept of, are we delivering for our clients? Is the work getting done? As opposed to, I can't see you. Clearly, it's not happening, and we're proving that you can work very effectively that way. And so it's actually created a much more trusting environment. And as we're proving today, it's humanised us a lot more, because you know, we've got 500 people on this call, and I've let everybody into my house, as you all are. And when you run town hall meetings with your staff, you do exactly the same thing. And so it's broken down a whole lot of barriers and proven that, you know, you can have people working part-time, you can have people working hours to suit them around their caring responsibilities, whether it's their kids, whether it's their parents, someone with a disability who needs their help. All of those things are opportunities that we don't want to miss, but to also balance those up against some of the challenges which we shouldn't walk past too quickly, and to recognise that this is a marathon. This is going to be with us, you know, for quite some time, Aaron. I hope the 5 years is not on the mark, but let's be realistic. It's going to be a while. So getting people to pace themselves and to balance working and being on a screen all day with some downtime is the other thing that's is really important, and that very much goes to that diverse and inclusive workforce. That means that, you know, I'm working at times that suit me, it might not suit you, and being broad-minded and to understand those things is all part of where, you know, out of a pandemic that is having some pretty horrible health outcomes and some very serious economic outcomes with people losing jobs and what have you, what are the good things that we can take out of this pandemic? And I think there are some, but we've got to make sure that we capture them in the right way. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And that role modeling, inviting people into your home, absolutely. I think that is what we should be doing. We've had one question that's come in from the audience, and I'm conscious of time. And this is one that I think about a lot. And so I think it would be a great one to hear from everyone on and leave it there. So the question says, this conversation has been happening since the 80s when I was doing engineering, and looks like it's still happening. And that's something that we've talked about today as well. So what are the universities doing to put diverse role models out in the community, in schools, in business communities, to show young people what is possible? And so maybe, as we don't all work in universities, I could ask you what the universities should be doing to ensure that we are building this inclusive, diverse profession. Nilram, I might start with you.
Sure. At the risk of sounding a little bit controversial, I feel like when I was at uni, I felt the most inclusive culture among the students themselves. So maybe there is a little bit for us to learn from them rather than the other way around. But in terms of the universities, I think universities could do a lot to inspire the students before they get to university. So how much, for example, could we get out there and inspire students to get into different streams, whatever it is that is their passion, just showing them that it is possible would go a long way in my eyes. I would just stop there and just conscious of time.
Absolutely. I think we all should listen to students more. I think that's a great suggestion. Aaron, what would you say?
Yeah, the alumni as well. I mean, I think that whenever I've come somewhere new or when I look back, I can chart the course of lots of students and I've seen what they've actually done in the world. And we've built and will be building in computer science and engineering more and more events around our alumni. For the next 5 years, we'll be celebrating the history of the School of Computer Science and Engineering over the next 5 years. And the alumni are great role models for our current students. And our current students, because they have such a nurturing environment that they already build within computer science and engineering, they're great role models for the future students. So I think it's this virtuous link between the alumni, the current students, and the next generation. And then making sure that people outside of that group, the parents, the grandparents, the rest of us, are encouraging everyone to say that all the facets of knowledge creation are open to everyone. And just because there's certain things that there's certain assumptions you might have in your head, don't let those assumptions color the future thinking of the next generation, because to do that hinders everyone. So it is for everyone, but also creating the chains between the students, I think, is the key.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And Bill, from being from outside the university, what should we be doing?
Thanks, Lucy. And I think one point, and I had the privilege of being able to address the civil engineering graduation ceremony in December last year at the university, and when I saw the diversity of graduates at bachelor, at masters, at doctorate level. There was immense diversity there, not just on gender, but culture, ethnicity, and for that group to be going out into the workforce, that to me is a very powerful message of the ongoing commitment and the ongoing impact that UNSW, but other universities are having to infuse this change into industry and into the society. And like I go back to what I said at the beginning, this is not an overnight change. To people who are saying, yes, we've been having this since the 80s. I was there in the 80s. Trust me, it has, in my view, it's come a long way. Have we still got more to do? Absolutely. But that's, let's build on the positives and build on that ongoing change. But yeah, it's not one to rest on for sure.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's a perfect note to leave it on. Build on the positives and listen to our community. Steve, I'm happy to hand it back to you.
Thanks a lot, Lucy, and what a fabulous discussion that was. And I'm sure myself, as well as everybody in the audience, has very much appreciated our panel. And to thank them to William Cox, to Nilram Azadpeyma, and to Professor Aaron Quigley, and also to you, Lucy, for your excellent moderation. I was asked to do a couple of reflections, and of course I could reflect on this for an hour, but I've got about a minute. Just starting off with Bill's comments around the building teams of diverse teams gives us the best outcomes, and if that's really what we're trying to achieve in business and university across society alike. Best ideas regardless who they come from, and the goal is a better society. For Nilram, innovation and creativity, and particularly a comment about more diversity in organisations. More diverse organisations have more loyalty, which I thought was very, very, very apt. And then to Aaron's comment about peeling away the onion, and on many different layers that entails. And as said, as he mentioned, if you took a picture of him, you wouldn't know so much about him. Of course, Aaron, I think as soon as you spoke, we knew you were Irish. But other than that, the respect for the native custodians, and I think the learning, and I think back to, you know, how much is lost in learning during various times. We've just been through very devastating bushfires. I start to reflect, how much have we not learnt and picked up from our heritage, and particularly the Indigenous heritage, and how much more we've got to learn there. And then choosing leaders that have natural appreciation of diversity. Perhaps I just want to summarise this from what my take of it was. Diversity is all-encompassing, it is inclusive, it is tolerance, it is sharing and understanding, it is everybody's responsibility, and it is an opportunity for all. And then we had the fantastic analogy between safety and diversity. What you walk past is what you accept. So I think with that is pretty much the summary. I'd love to go on for another 30 minutes with the discussions. Unfortunately, we've been end of our time. I'd like just to thank our alumni, friends, and all for attending this session. I hope it's been valuable. It's certainly been valuable for me. The webinar has been recorded, as we mentioned earlier. And if you have a few spare minutes now, we'd very much love to get your feedback on the survey, on how we do this and whether we can improve or do it differently in the future. And we will also send this out through an email. So that draws the close to the session. And again, I'd just like to thank all of our alumni and friends for your support and continuing support through the future. Thank you to everybody. Bye-bye.